All right, so you're thinking about retirement and maybe looking into this Fidelity and Guaranteed Life Prosperity Elite Annuity, huh? Well, you've come to the right place for a deep dive.
Yeah, we're going to break it down.
Exactly. We're going to break it down, cut through all the fancy marketing lingo.
Which, let's be honest, can be a bit confusing sometimes.
Definitely. We're going to look at some excerpts from their marketing materials and figure out if this is something that's worth your time to even look into.
Yeah, because annuities in general can be a little bit tricky.
They can be, and there's so many different kinds.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And this one has some really unique features that we're going to get into. But first, let's just kind of set the stage.
Yeah, sounds good.
Right off the bat, they're using terms like guaranteed growth and financial stability. Sounds pretty good, right?
And it sounds like every retiree's dream.
Exactly. But what do those terms actually mean in the context of this specific annuity? Like, help us understand what they're really talking about here.
Okay, so guaranteed growth, in this case, they're probably referring to things like the vesting bonus. So like they add a certain percentage to your account balance after you've had the annuity for a while. And then, the potential growth that you could get through what they call these index crediting strategies. It's a little bit complicated, but we'll get into that.
We will definitely get into that.
And then financial stability is probably pointing to the guaranteed lifetime income. They have this rider called the EGMWB rider, and that's what's supposed to provide that guaranteed income. But, the devil's always in the details, like how big is that bonus? How well are those indexes performing? And what are the catches with this guaranteed income?
Exactly. So I'm already kind of hooked on this phrase they use, market participation with downside protection. I mean, come on. Who doesn't want that?
Sounds like a magic trick almost, right?
Right. It's like having your cake and eating it too. So how does this actually work? Does it really tap into market gains and shield you from losses?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, I was a little bit skeptical too when I first saw that. It sounds a little too good to be true, but it really comes down to how indexed annuities work. So it's not like you're directly investing in the stock market.
Right.
Instead, your returns are linked to the performance of certain indexes. Like, they mentioned the S&P 500 or maybe some other more specialized index, but there's usually a cap on how much you can earn, like a maximum percentage of the index gain that you can actually capture. And the way they calculate those gains can be pretty complex. It's not always straightforward.
Okay, so speaking of indexes, they mentioned a whole bunch. Let's see, we've got the Balanced Asset 5 Index, the Barclays Trailblazers Sectors 5 Index, Gold Commodity, the GS Global Factor Index, and of course the S&P 500 Index. That's a mouthful.
It is.
So what should someone be thinking about when they're choosing between all of these different options?
I would say it really comes down to your risk tolerance and what your goals are. So, if you're okay with a little bit more risk, you want the potential for higher returns, you might be interested in something like the Barclays Trailblazers Sectors 5 Index.
Okay.
That focuses on specific sectors of the market that they think are going to do really well, like maybe technology or healthcare.
Yeah.
But if you're someone who's, looking for maybe a smoother ride, less volatility, you might prefer the Balanced Asset 5 Index, which kind of spreads the risk around, like the name suggests, a little bit more.
Makes sense. Okay, so then there's also this thing called the vesting bonus. What does that even mean? How does that impact someone's returns?
Oh, yeah, the vesting bonus. It's kind of like a reward for sticking with the annuity. Let's say the bonus is, 8%, and it vests after 7 years.
Okay.
You invest $100,000, you just sit on it, and after 7 years, they're like, boom, here's an extra $8,000.
Okay.
It's basically free money, but you got to be patient to get it.
Got it. All right, so let's move on to this EGMWB rider that I mentioned before. They're really emphasizing the guaranteed income aspect, which, understandably, a lot of people are looking for that.
Yeah, who doesn't want guaranteed income in retirement, right?
Right. But what's the real story here? Is it as good as it sounds?
Well, I think the EGMWB rider can be really valuable if you're looking for that predictable income stream in retirement. And they advertise this 10% annual roll-up rate. It sounds amazing, but, and there's always a but, right?
There's always a but.
It's applied to what they call your income base, which isn't necessarily the same as your initial investment. It's a little more complicated than that.
Yep.
So let's say, hypothetically, your income base is $50,000.
Okay.
With that 10% roll-up, it grows to $55,000 the next year, then $60,500, and it keeps going up. So that compounding can really boost your guaranteed income over time. But the question is, how do they calculate that initial income base? That's what you got to dig into.
So you're saying, there's probably some fine print that we need to look at closely here.
Always fine print, right? One of the things to watch out for is how do withdrawals affect your income base, before a certain age especially?
Mhm.
Because you might end up facing penalties, and that could really eat into your gains.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Now, what about this impairment multiplier they talk about?
Mhm.
When does that kick in? Like, what triggers the doubled income payments?
Yeah.
And how does that whole thing play into, the idea of having peace of mind in retirement?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So the impairment multiplier kicks in if you can't do 2 out of 6 basic activities of daily living. Things like, can you bathe yourself, dress yourself, eat, use the toilet, basic stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's designed to give you that extra financial support when you really need it. If your health takes a turn for the worse, it's kind of like an extra safety net.
Okay,
And you don't see that in every annuity. That's kind of a unique feature.
that's good to know. Okay, so let's talk about liquidity. They mentioned this 10% annual withdrawal limit, which sounds pretty restrictive to me. Like, how much of a pain is that in real life? And then they also mentioned these nursing home and terminal illness waivers. What are those all about?
Yeah, so the 10% limit, you're right, it does sound restrictive, but honestly, it's pretty standard for annuities.
Okay.
They do it to kind of encourage people to save for the long term, but it could definitely be a problem if you need a big chunk of money unexpectedly. That's where those waivers come in. So, like, let's say you need long-term care in a nursing home, those costs can be, like, insane.
Yeah.
And so being able to access more than just that 10% could be a lifesaver, literally.
Literally.
The terminal illness waiver works kind of the same way. It basically gives you more financial flexibility if, something really bad happens.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about estate planning. So they offer a lump sum death benefit or payments spread out over time
Yeah.
for your beneficiaries. How do those options fit into different estate planning goals?
Right. Well, it really depends on, what your beneficiaries need and what you want to happen with your money. A lump sum, it's a big chunk of cash all at once. It can be helpful for paying off debts, maybe covering some expenses.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's also the risk that it could be mismanaged, especially if your beneficiaries aren't really good with money. Spreading the payments out over time, that can provide a more steady stream of income. It could give them a little bit more financial security, make sure the money lasts longer. So it's really about what makes the most sense for your situation.
Okay, so it sounds like overall, this Prosperity Elite Annuity, it has some potential benefits, like the potential for growth, the guaranteed income. But as we've been talking about, there's a lot of nuances, there's some limitations, and you got to look at the fine print really closely.
Absolutely. There's no such thing as, a perfect financial product. It really depends on your individual needs, your risk tolerance, your goals.
Mhm.
So before you make any decisions, it's super important to talk to a financial advisor.
Yeah, you always say that, and it's so true.
Someone who can look at the big picture, look at your whole financial situation, and help you figure out if this specific annuity is right for your retirement plan.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been a great deep dive. Thanks for breaking it all down.
No problem. Always happy to help.
All right, that's it for today's show. We'll be back next week with a deep dive into another financial product that you might be considering. See you then.